On Monday, Nigerians gasped in horror as news broke of a 21-story building collapse in the highbrow area of Ikoyi in Lagos State. Still under construction, it was the largest building in the country to crumble under the weight of poor building materials and lax enforcement of the applicable building code for multi-story buildings. The unfortunate incident has resulted in the death of 19 persons, even as rescue workers continue to work round the clock to rescue many more still trapped in the rubble. A visibly angered Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, who visited the site in the wee hours of this morning, has already suspended Gbolahan Oki, General Manager of the Lagos State Building Control Agency, and launched an independent panel of inquiry to get to the root of the disaster. But will these measures be sufficient to stem future incidents of building failures in Lagos and other parts of the country? To answer this question, we are now being joined by Dr. Lanre Towry-Coker and Anwuli Waters Okeke. Dr. Towry-Coker is an architect, lawyer, author, and former Lagos State Commissioner for Housing, while Ms. Waters Okeke is a lawyer and CEO of Mason Hills Properties, a real estate firm that specializes in buying, selling, and marketing luxury properties. They will also be speaking to us about the legal remedies available to the families of the victims and investors who bought flats in the Ikoyi building. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Well, Dr. Lanre Towry-Coker, good to see you again, sir.
Good morning.
It's been quite a while.
It has been.
Well, I mean, this is your area. You're an architect. You've been commissioner for housing. Let's just start off by asking this question. Why do buildings collapse? Because within 24 hours after the collapse of that building on Gerrard Road, we were told that another building again collapsed somewhere around Osapa, London, here in Lagos, even though there were no casualties in that particular case. So why are these buildings collapsing when we're supposed to have a housing ministry and a building control agency?
Thank you very much. Well, there are many reasons why buildings collapse. It's almost like asking, why do you have a toothache or why do you have a headache? There are many reasons why you have headaches and toothaches and all that kind of thing. But the most common reason is lack of enforcement and also lack of the proper utilization of professionals. If you use the qualified professionals, architects, structural engineers, geoscience engineers, geotechnical engineers, quantity surveyors, the buildings will not collapse. There would not be any reason for any building collapse if you use the registered and experienced professionals. So that's one reason. The other reason, of course, is the fact that there's no survey or no control over the types of materials which are used. You get people using suspect cement. You get people using suspect reinforcement, which can't stand stress tests. And you have people who just flout all sorts of regulations. Everybody thinks that he's a builder, whereas in fact he's not a builder. Even the people who build do it at the risk of the community. And unfortunately, another reason is the fact that the state, Lagos State, you said it's housing. It's not housing, actually, it's physical planning. The state doesn't have the number of professionals, qualified professionals, which it takes to enforce the regulations for the strength of materials, the strength of all the concrete beams, the people who will come at, at the beginning to ensure that all the structural conditions are met. So it's a whole myriad of reasons. It's not just one.
Right. We'll definitely be delving into more of those reasons with Dr. Towry-Coker, but I'd like to bring you in, Anwuli Waters Okeke. Thank you for joining us this morning. But let's talk about the consequences.
Thank you so much for having me.
the consequences, the ramifications of this disaster that has happened. I mean, we know that saying, safe as houses, where people are supposed to feel safe in their own homes. And then another meaning of that expression is that property is supposed to be a safe investment. What do we say about incidents like this that happen? Do you have any advice for would-be investors, your clients, or people who have invested in this property, while we're talking about the tragedy of the loss of 22 lives, which have been confirmed, sadly, have been lost in this disaster? We also are discussing the consequences to people who have invested and what should be done going forward. What do you have to say about that?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I just want to use this opportunity to extend my deepest condolences to the families that are affected by this unfortunate tragedy. You see, in cases of building collapses, it's a very complex situation. It's a very complex issue. And to be very honest, in order to determine exactly what has caused collapse would require a thorough investigation to be carried out. And that's what we have seen that the Lagos state government is doing. And we commend the efforts of the first responders in moving swiftly and ensuring that, you know, people are being rescued. And even up till now, there is still continuous effort to ensure that more people are rescued. We know that this is going to have a huge impact on the real estate industry, and it's definitely going to cause buyer bias, and a lot of people are going to be a little bit more skeptical into buying into tall-rise buildings. But the thing is that people that hire professionals, agencies like our firm, that do the preliminary work, that go to these developers and ask for these tests, and ask for their approvals, and ask for their permits, what has been done, what has not been done, would ensure that buyers don't find themselves in situations like this. So we go ahead of the buyer even before they ask these questions, and we ensure that the appropriate permits have been gotten, and the things that are supposed to be done are already in place to ensure that the buyer makes an informed decision, and ultimately that the quality and safety of the building is guaranteed.
So I'll come to you, Dr. Lanre Towry-Coker, sir. I don't get it, and maybe you can throw more light on it.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said I don't get what is happening as regards this building.
Okay.
Because the Deputy Governor of Lagos State came out yesterday to say the builders or those in charge of this building got permission for 15 floors. Then the general manager of the building agency, LABSCA, it's called, Lagos State Building Control, came out to say that they actually gave provision for 15 floors. The deputy governor said 21 floors, that they got permission to go to 21 floors. And LABSCA said they got permission for 15 floors, that it exceeded the permission they got for 15 floors. In a case like this, you know, it brings up the conversation of enforcement. You're hearing people saying two different things all around. What is happening?
Well, you know, I can't guess what's going on in the administration. The reality is that if the deputy governor says 21 floors, the approving authority says 15 floors, there's obviously a dichotomy there. But I don't think we need to jump to conclusions. I believe it's very important that the government, in order to stop this kind of atrocity and this kind of tragedy occurring time and time again, has to set up a proper judicial commission of inquiry before we start apportioning blame, who did what, whether it was 15 floors or 21 floors. Somebody in the physical planning, development control, or the whole system gave 15 floors. How it got to 21 floors is another story altogether. But what I understand from, well, hearsay, there's a lot of hearsay, is that 15 floors were given, but the developer went to 21 floors. And there's no way a serious or professional firm of structural engineers or architects will go along with that differential of 6 floors, because it would lead to collapse. We know that as professionals, and that's what happened. It led to collapse. And from what I saw yesterday, going to the location, it collapsed from the top, which means that it was overloaded. Buildings are designed to take both live load and dead load. If the dead load is too much, of course it would collapse. And you said, what's going on? I think you need to ask that question from the administration.
Well, Anwuli, let me come to you very quickly. Tundu already raised the question about what remedies are available, but let's break that down in clear, specific terms. Now, the persons who already made deposits for those apartments, and some of them fully paid up, what now happens to them? Would the company be under strict obligation to make refunds, or this is a case of an investment gone bad? And if so, can they sue? What options are available to them? Then secondly, the families of the affected persons, can they also ask for some kind of compensation, restitution? Can they also go to court? Since the company behind that building has a responsibility to ensure a duty of care and to deliver to both investors and ensure that the building they were putting up does not result in this kind of tragedy.
Okay, so I'll take your question one at a time. But I do believe that it is very premature at this stage for us to go into the talk about compensation without us getting the full fact. The investigation is currently ongoing, and until we have the full fact as to why this building collapsed and the parties involved, I mean, there could be multiple parties that are culpable in this situation, but we must wait. We must be patient. I know that a lot of people are outraged. A lot of people want answers. More than anything, the victims do deserve some compensation, but they also deserve the truth. They want to know why this has happened and what the government is doing to ensure that it does not occur again. So it's important that we wait. I know the emotions are flying, but we should wait and be patient for the government to conclude their investigation before we can go into the case of who is liable and what compensation should be paid out. But I cannot stress enough the importance of having a real estate agent. I'm not just talking about the agents that are just interested in taking their commission, doing the introductions and walking away. I'm talking about the agents that understand the principles of agency, that are with the client from the moment they express interest till the point that the close, and even sometimes in our case, even after the close, providing after sales services as well. So it is very important that the agents are not bypassed, because we do the preliminary work. We ask the questions that a buyer could walk into a building and not even know the right questions to ask, the right documents to request for. And these high-rise buildings are very, very volatile. There's a lot of tests go into them. That's why you see that it takes a couple of years sometimes before they mobilize into site. The structural valuations have to be done. The soil tests will have to be done in order to determine whether piling should be done. So many things go into the planning of these high-rise buildings. So it is very important that people consult the services of professionals who have the adequate knowledge that can provide adequate advice as well to ensure that the quality and the safety of the development is guaranteed and that your investment is protected.
Dr. Towry-Coker, you did mention the importance of a proper judicial inquiry, and the Lagos state government has set up a panel, so we do hope that the facts will soon emerge. But, there's been this sort of rush to self-exonerate that we've noticed. Some people saying, I pulled out at this point, I didn't pull out at this point. Are they in any way liable, even if they did pull out? Is there a proper procedure that ought to have been followed? And obviously, we've talked about protection for the investors, but what procedures or processes are in place to protect workers who are sent into these buildings and unfortunately appear to have perished?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, people often forget about the workers, both the skilled and unskilled workers. These are the people who actually build the structure. I saw a video which is trending. Some people were standing on the top floor. They weren't even wearing hard hats. In my profession, if you're going to a site, you must wear a hard hat. It's not a party, it's a building under construction. You can't for instance, walk into a doctor's surgery just unannounced and be walking around. It's just not done because there are professional etiquettes to be taken into consideration. You talked about the workers. Very often these workers are daily paid. Some of them are just laborers, some are contracted. But what is very important is that a building of that magnitude, you should have a signboard outside the site telling you who's the architect, or rather who's the developer or who's the client, who's the architect, who's the structural engineer, who's the quantity surveyor, who's the mechanical electrical engineer, who are the geotechnical engineers. The whole structural team, the whole professional team must be there. So you can say at a moment's notice, these people were the people who designed it. That's another issue. The professional bodies, the Nigerian Institute of Architects, Council of Registered Engineers of Nigeria, have professional numbers. We're all numbered like professional numbers. Like lawyers, they have their professional numbers. You would have your professional number there, so we can see whether you actually qualified or not. Once again, I saw the video of some Oyinbo people, foreign people, white people. They said, oh, this is my architect. Who is the architect? What's his name? At the end of the day, somebody has to be liable. Who was the architect for that building? Or who was the structural engineer for that building? We know the structural engineer because the fellow wrote a letter saying, I wash my hands of it. But who was the architect? Whoever was the architect also stands liable in our profession. And you know what? The worst thing an architect can have is a collapsed building, because that's a kiss of death. You would not, it's like doctors. If you have your patient die, you get sued for malpractice. Equally, architects, at least in the UK where I trained or in the US, you can be sued for malpractice, for professional negligence. So there's a lot to be garnered from what happened there. And as the lawyer, the estate agent said, we need to know the facts before we jump to any conclusions. But you're very correct. The workers who died, what were their names? Was there a roll call? That's why it was very important to have competent construction company. You can't tell me somebody is doing 21 stories direct labor. It's a joke. Of course it will collapse. I would not, as a professional architect with 7 years experience, even with all my knowledge, go and build a structure like that by direct labor. I would call a reputable construction company with a track record, because there's safety issues involved. And we know what to do, but very often the developers and some of these clients, the developers, they tend to want to cut corners. They want to use professionals because, it's going to cost more money. Would you argue with a dentist when you go and have your tooth removed? I don't think so. Or would you argue with your doctor? Oh no, don't remove my whatever it is in my stomach. But people argue with architects. They argue with structural engineers. Structural engineers and architects will go to school for a long time. Architects go to school for 7 years.
Okay. Let me bring Anwuli into this conversation. Anwuli, as a real estate person yourself, you sell most of these properties. Question is, where do we draw the line between cost and big, chunky profits and quality of building? Because, the reason you sell real estate is because you want to make profit. Where do we draw that line? Because the problem here is a lot of people want to make humongous profit in real estate. And they want to tell their inspirational stories on Instagram. But the question is, where do you draw the line with safety?
Thank you very much for your question. And honestly, in a nutshell, what I can say is that quality costs money. And people need to understand that, again, what Mr. Coker said is very correct. You need to ensure that you're hiring the right people, you're investing in the right development. You understand? Like you need to ensure that your safety is not compromised no matter what. So you see a lot of developers that cut corners, but there is a vast majority of developers out there that have integrity, that do not compromise on safety, that ensure that these things are at the forefront of all their development. So not all developers are out there to just make money. It's a trust relationship between a buyer and a contractor. For example, it's the same way you said that you go into the hospital for a surgery and you're entrusting your life to the doctor because you believe that they know what they're doing and hoping, obviously, that you do not die. That's the same way that these buyers entrust their safety to these developers. And a lot of developers out there honestly do take their time and ensure that, safety is at the forefront and at the paramount of their development. So it would be really unfair to, for buyers to become skeptical and think that all developers cut corners in order to gain maximum profit. That is absolutely not the case. We sell these buildings and we know the things that we request to see and the things that we request to ask to ensure that the request to see and to ensure that, the buyers are making appropriate investments and their investments are being protected and that, the quality and safety of the building is not compromised at all and that their safety is guaranteed.
Well, thank you, Anwuli. Dr. Towry-Coker, a few of the details that are in the public domain are really very shocking. The designer of the project, this particular project, withdrew in 2020, testing about the integrity of the building. The Lagos State government, somewhere down the line in July this year, slammed a stop work order on the developers of the project. But somehow we're told that work continued in one form or the other. They were supposed to rectify certain things. Now, the chairman of the Nigerian Institute of Architects, the Lagos branch, says, in fact, what they have observed is that the architect was also the consultant to the project. That was what he's been quoted as saying in the newspapers. Now, why do all of these, kind of situations happen? Will you say it's a failure of governance? And then what advice will you give the state government beyond what they have done, setting up a probe panel and then suspending the man in charge of the building control agency in Lagos State?
Okay, thank you very much. You mentioned that my colleague, the chairman of the state chapter, said that the architect was a consultant, but the architect is the consultant.
Well, maybe the architect and some other person. Somebody who's not supposed to mix the roles.
Who was the architect? We don't know who the architect was. What was the name of the architect? Was he a registered architect by the Nigerian Institute of Architects and also Architects Registration Council of Nigeria? So that doesn't quite tally. Maybe you misquoted him. But
okay. No, it's in the papers.
Because the architect is the consultant. He's a leader of the building team. That's his function. That's why he knows something about everybody else's profession. Now, you also asked about, perhaps you can get the correct quotation. You also asked about what should the state government do about it. Well, there are lots of solutions. One thing I can tell you, for free, the state government cannot regulate and supervise every single building under construction in Lagos State. It's just not possible. It's physically impossible. It is professionally impossible. How many engineers do we have? How many architects do we have? So my suggestion would be that in lieu of lack of professional capacity within the public system, I would suggest that they ask the professional bodies like the Council of Registered Engineers of Nigeria, the Nigerian Institute of Architects, to nominate experienced professional companies, which the developers would pay for, by the way, which the developer would pay for, to take the strain off the public system, because they can't cope. We all know that. Anybody who's got technical capacity is off to Canada. So the same goes for anybody in the construction industry. So my suggestion is that there are quite a few competent engineering architectural firms in Lagos State. And with my experience in government, I would suggest that the government liaises with the professional bodies for them to be able to check the calculations, because those are the most important things, read the seismic tests, the soil tests, and in the case of things like cube tests, stress tests, we need to have more laboratories. A lot of the cube tests and stress tests are done at University of Lagos. But we need more organizations like that. They need to, because you see, we still think of Lagos as a small village or a big village. It's not. Lagos State is the largest, third fastest growing city in the world in 2010. Third fastest growing city in the world. So when you have that kind of headlong speed of development, you need to have the technical manpower to be able to, as it were, control it. Simple.
You've raised an excellent solution to a problem.
I was going to respond to a point you raised.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. About the chairman of the
yes, no, I just asked a question.
Of
Yes.
architects
Yes.
in Lagos State.
Lagos State.
His name is David Majek.
I know him. He's my
Yes,
colleague.
and I'm double checking now, and this is the headline they gave, that
Yes.
he complained that same person is consultant and architect, as indicated in the signage that was in front of that building.
But what is the name
And
of the architect?
Well, that's not stated. And he was saying that the state government will need to strengthen regulatory processes, which is the same point that you have made.
Yes.
So I didn't make that up. I
Okay.
was quoting directly.
I know you. You don't
Right,
make
so you
things up.
said, so the issue about the state government lacking the capacity
Yes.
addresses a message I just got rather panicked, that there's two other disasters waiting to happen, which I won't just blindly name, obviously, because the developer is going beyond the scope of what has been approved. So that, I hope, addresses that for that viewer. But I have a question for you both, and I'll start with Anwuli. What is the direct impact of this disaster on the property market in Lagos?
Thank you again. Like I said before, this is going to have a huge impact on the industry. There are a lot of high-rise buildings that are currently coming up. And truly speaking, a lot of people are going to be skeptical. I mean, right now, there are obviously rigorous requirements that have to be put in place before final building approvals are gotten. But we expect that obviously right now the government will tighten up their belts and even be more strict with what is required before giving approvals to high-rise buildings like that to be constructed.
Sir, what do you think is the direct impact of this disaster on the property market?
Well, if I were living in a high-rise right now, in any of the quote-unquote highbrow areas, I would be wondering, was this building designed by a competent professional firm? Because let me assure you one thing. There's no way a professional firm of architects and structural engineers and geotech engineers and a full team would have a collapsed building. It's just not possible. It's impossible. I mean, I don't know how I can convince you it's impossible. If you're an experienced structural engineer, experienced architect, experienced in your science and your technical aspects of your field, and you also bring on board, very important, a competent construction company with years of track record. Buildings won't collapse. How often do you have buildings collapsing in London? It's unheard of. Okay, Grenfell Towers. Which brings me to another point. We're talking about statutory control. We haven't even spoken about the materials which are being used all over the place. I mean, sometimes I go into, before COVID, of course, you go into functions, you look at the ceiling, you say, my God, what happens if there's a fire? We're all dead because what they've used as a canopy is flammable. There are certain things which should not be used in construction, both internally and externally, which nobody gives a damn about. There's no control about these materials. So as I said before, what the state government should do is to work closely with the professional organizations in the construction industry, And also, I know they have some kind of register. You can't just go and build a 21-story building in London. You'll have to be a certain type of contractor. It'd be a joke. For me, even with my training, to say I'm going to build a 21-story building, it's nonsense. There's a whole series of procedures which you have to follow. And you don't get planning approval just like that. It'll take maybe 2 years before you get it. Because there's a whole process. We're talking about the 21st century now. There's COP21 in Glasgow. Have we even spoken about the environmental hazards of some of the materials that we're using? We haven't even gone there yet. So the state and the regulatory authorities need to go that much further. Even with my experience in the industry, I still have to do what they call CPD, continuous professional development. Because when I trained, it's not the same training as the guys who are receiving it now. There are environmental factors as well, which you've got to take into consideration. Buildings like that with a lot of cement, a lot of concrete, they have huge carbon footprints. Have we even begun to think about that? This is the 21st century where you must be able to compete with the rest of the world. So,
And speaking of carbon footprint, it's interesting to know that we have a world where we have decarbonized cement now for buildings and the likes. But Anwuli, I want to come to you. Anwuli, do you think this is the problem? That the real estate sector in Nigeria now houses a lot of, I don't want to use the word, the C word, but houses every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Everybody you see by the roadside that can speak.
Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Can you hear me, Anwuli?
quacks.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. It's
Good.
a little bit faint.
I said, do you
Yes.
think the problem is the fact that the real estate industry now has got a lot of C word people? I don't want to use the complete C word. The fact that everybody that can speak or pitch some house to anybody gets into the real estate market with no proper trading. Anybody calls themselves a developer today, as long as you have money or have people to support you. You know, so there have been calls for regulations of developers and even real estate salespeople that know next to nothing about the business. Do you think that's the crux of the problem? That's the crux of the matter?
I don't think she heard you.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. The line
Anwuli,
is
can you hear
very-
me? Can you hear me?
Please, can you hear me?
Can you hear me? The question is, do you think there are a lot more, I'll use the C word now, charlatans in this business? Do you think that's the problem? Everybody gets into real estate. For the life of me, almost everybody you see is a real estate developer or a real estate salesman on the streets of Lagos. Do you think that's where the problem lies?
Yes, I honestly, I don't think that's the exact problem, but honestly, it comes back to what Mr. Coker was saying. You need to hire competent professionals. You need to check the background of these professionals, from the architects to the engineers, to the plumbers, to who the contractors are, who the developers are. These things are very vital and very key. They're very, very important in ensuring that you do not fall into the hands of what I say quack developers. But it's very necessary that, you know, we shortlist and cut down on the number of people that we entrust with our lives, because honestly, trusting people with your lives. The same way that there are so many, you know, agents and so many people that are not competent in doing what they're supposed to do. The fact that you can build a 2-story building is not the same as building a 21-story building. So care needs to be taken to ensure that the people that you're entrusting your money to, entrusting your lives to, are competent enough to deliver on what they're promising to deliver.
Well, thank you very much, Anwuli, for joining us. But before we go, Dr. Towry-Coker, this is not new.
Sorry?
This is not new. Buildings
It's not new.
collapsing.
Yes.
We've been dealing with this for years, even when you were in government. But these incidents occur, the media will rush to the place, will report to it, panel of inquiry will be set up, there will be talk about who is at fault and all of that. We may never even know who was the architect or who the workers were or the exact identity of those who died. So it's some kind of cycle. Why is this the case? Because yes, we'll deal with this now. In another 2 weeks, people will just move on. People will forget. So why is it that in this country, there's no proper accounting process, even for something as important as the loss of human lives?
Well, look, let me tell you what. There's amateurism everywhere. Your colleague mentioned the C word. He used the charlatans. There are charlatans in every profession. There are charlatans who are people, quack doctors. I hope I don't meet a quack dentist, but there are quacks everywhere. We talk about regulation. Look, there's an organization called REDAN, Real Estate Developers Association of Nigeria, which I'm sure you've heard of, which was set up by late Lateef Jakonde after he left the governorship. There are professional estate surveyors. They go to university to do it. They understand the basic elements of construction. They understand what is a damp-proof course. They understand what is called rising damp. If they take you to a building, you say, oh, what is that there? You say, oh, that's rising damp. How was it caused? The contractor didn't use DPC. So nobody, you can't just go around and say, oh, I'm going to build a two-story building. That's nonsense, I'm sorry to say. Because that two-story building, as you said quite correctly, will collapse. Because they won't even use reinforcement, the correct reinforcement. I understand these days they're trying to use bamboo as reinforcement. Can you believe that? They're trying to use bamboo instead of iron, steel rods, which are tested by the contractor and by the structural engineer to have the correct compressive strength and the correct tensile strength. These are technical things which an ordinary guy walking on the street wouldn't have a clue about, but they say, oh, I'm a developer. And yet, as you said, buildings keep collapsing. They keep collapsing because there's always a change in government. There's no continuity. As I said, as you know, I was in government. There's no continuity. And as I said, the most important thing is the issue of the lack of professional capacity. And I suggested a way of getting around that, which is for the state government, even the local government, because you apply to local government, your planning approval goes to the state government. You need to liaise with the professional bodies so they can help you. The structural engineers, we need to know who they are. So even for a two-story building, it's not a small joke, two-story building. A family lives in a two-story building. And if a two-story building collapses, people will die or get seriously injured.
Right. I wanted to ask you, I know it's not your métier necessarily, about the rescue efforts, such as it is, but I'm told we're running out of time and we need to wrap up. So if you could, in a few words, what are your thoughts on the fact that we're not seeing the usual paraphernalia that we see when these things happen elsewhere, rescued dogs and what have you, teams being flown in? I actually had somebody send me a message about how in Miami, when the building collapsed, the team was flown in from Israel. Why are we not seeing that?
Yeah, well, how can I answer that question? I mean, you know, it's for the politicians, I believe, you know, because you see, it goes back again to capacity. Do we have rescue dogs, for instance? I've never heard of any rescue dogs. I don't know, maybe you know in the journalistic industry. As for the rescue efforts, I went past the place yesterday as soon as I understood you guys were asking me to come and talk. And I heard a lot of noise. I saw some caterpillars and so on, but not the usual amount of, as you said, hustle and bustle and concern. I feel sorry for the people who have lost their lives, for their families, the children, and everybody who's been affected. But you see, we need to step up in Lagos State, not just in Lagos State, in Nigeria. Just got to step up. We're in the 21st century. We can't pretend to be somewhere else, you know, because people are looking at us. I saw CNN or BBC yesterday. It was a byline. Collapsed building in Nigeria. I'm sure you saw it too. Collapsed building in Nigeria, CNN. Collapsed building in Nigeria on BBC. Is that a good advert for investment? So it all goes back to what I said right from the beginning, capacity utilization. And real estate developers, as the lady said, are not all bad guys. But I would say to them, please use professionals, professional firms of structural engineers, architects, conservators. Do your soil tests if the building is in an area like this. Do your soil tests everywhere and anywhere. Don't worry about the cost, because at the end of the day, if the building collapses, you are responsible. That's what I'm saying to all developers. And also, the real estate agents, some of them are quacks. Quite a lot of them are quacks. You know that. You get people who say, well, I've got this place to let to you. And you say, are you registered? No, I'm not. I'm a dentist. Or no, so they won't say it's a dentist. They say, oh, I don't want to say it's a journalist, because I'll be ruffling feathers. You say, oh, I'm a bicycle repairer. But today I'm a real estate developer or an estate agent. So we've got to be strict with what we do. We can't continue to cut corners. It's like you want to fly a plane and the guy says to you, well, I'm not really a pilot.
You'll be tempted to jump out of the window if it is possible to do so.
You get out before the plane takes off. You know.
Anyway.
I used to be a hairdresser, but I'm now a pilot. I mean, excuse me?
Absurd.
Thank you very much,
You know?
sir, for joining us.
Yeah.
And thank you also, Anwuli Towry-Coker, if you are still with us.